The point I was trying to make in the last installment was that working in a negative way is so uncluttered that it can be used in any situation whatsoever, no matter how much pressure we're under. Once we've got the hang of being vigilant in this way, in the particular way that I've been talking about, then that is all we need to know for any situation whatsoever. And that really is unconditional. Obviously, life can throw very many situations at us, which is a bit of a ridiculous understatement. But notwithstanding that, being vigilant or being aware is the helpful thing to do, no matter what situation life throws at us. So from seeing this, we can understand that working negatively with painful mental states goes beyond our notions of our normal notions, our regular notions of therapy or tools or anything like that. It goes far beyond any notions that we might have about therapy. So it's quite questionable whether we should even be using the word therapy or not, but I'll carry on all the same. So in the last installment, I was talking about vigilance, staying awake. Vigilance doesn't mean hypervigilance. We're not looking out for anything in particular. We don't know what we're looking out for. So it's not focused vigilance. It's not looking at the phone waiting for it to ring, or it's not tunnel vision vigilance. It's totally open vigilance. We're just open to everything that's going on. And we don't know what's going on. And we don't know what's going to pop out of the rabbit hole. And we don't know if it is even a rabbit hole or what kind of thing it is. It's like reality itself is one giant rabbit hole. And we don't know what's going to come out of it. So we can't preempt. We can't have any handy little tricks up our sleeves as to what to do, because we don't know. So when we don't know, there's nothing we can do, which sounds a bit stupid, but it's true. It's actually a good way of differentiating between the positive approach and the negative approach. In the positive approach, we have to assume that we know something, otherwise there's no positive approach. We have to assume a basis. We have to assume that there's something we know. And then we act out of that basis. We act from that platform of assumed knowledge. And so that platform of assumed knowledge is our blind spot, because we've assumed it. And once we've assumed it, we're busy tackling everything that happens on the basis of that assumed viewpoint, on the basis of that taken for granted platform. And so everything we see is going to be conditioned by that assumption, i.e. it's going to be seen in the light of that assumption. So here we are. We've developed a fine big blind spot for ourselves, and then we're acting as if that blind spot, we're acting to perpetuate that blind spot in everything we do. And that's what a positive approach absolutely involves. Another way of differentiating between the positive and negative approach is to say that if the negative approach is being aware in an unconditional way, without any assumptions, without any prejudicial ideas that we might have there in the background, the positive approach is controlling. controlling always has to have this idea that we know something, unless we jump to some kind of conclusion about the world we can't control because we don't know where we are or where we want to go, and we don't know what we are, and we don't know what we want to be. And so the thing about this is that it's important that we get clear that we can't have it both ways. We can't be aware and control. We have to put our money on one horse or the other. And it often happens in therapies that we try to incorporate a bit of awareness with a bit of controlling, because we can't help throwing the controlling in there because we think it's so vital. We don't really see the function of controlling as actually to perpetuate blind spots. And the thing is, we don't want to see that, because the blind spot we are perpetuating is our idea of ourselves, and we don't want to see that our idea of ourselves is a blind spot created by a blind spot or equals a blind spot. So that's why we're so attached to controlling. The moment we start controlling, we stop being aware. We assume and then we control. There's no way to control without first assuming, and assuming means we've closed our accounts with reality, we've closed the books, and we're just acting on the basis of what we think we know. Controlling is always like that. Which isn't to say that there's never a fit or an appropriate time for controlling, because there is. In the known world, there are situations that we need to deal with. If my kettle's run out of water, I have to control that and put water in it so I can effectively make a cup of tea, and no one's going to argue with that. But we're not talking about the pragmatics of everyday life. We're talking about working with painful mental states, which is a different thing. So I was really extolling the virtue of awareness or being vigilant in comparison to controlling. And having said what I've just said, it's more than apparent why I would make that point. It's very easy. Awareness isn't about perpetuating blind spots. It'd be bizarre if it was. How could awareness be about perpetuating blind spots or perpetuating the lack of awareness? Awareness isn't about perpetuating the lack of awareness, very, very obviously. We don't have to argue about that either. And there's something else we can say about it. So if I can move on from the somewhat clumsy language that I was using in the last instalment, what I could say is that the vigilance, not the hypervigilance, but the vigilance, is all about not being fooled and not being tricked. So that means the situation that we all find ourselves is one in which we're very likely to be tricked. There's a principle of deception operating. We can't afford to be gullible. We can't afford to be dumb. Because if we're gullible, if we're dumb, then the principle of deception means that we will be deceived. Sure as eggs are eggs. As sure as toast is toast. We will be deceived. It's a mathematical certainty. If you're gullible, then you will be deceived. It's like a rule of the universe, of course. And we know that in the human social sphere. Never give a sucker an even break. That's what we say. So that means if you spot a sucker coming down the street towards you, you take advantage of them, because they can be taken advantage of, because they're suckers, they're gullible. You can take them to the cleaners, and that's what you get for being gullible. It's just like a rule of the universe. It may not seem very fair, but that's the way it works. You don't go trusting every idiot that comes up to you promising you loads of bullshit. Even though that's what we do. particularly with regard to politicians and our leaders. We're very, very happy to agree or fall for the trick when they promise us bullshit. But this goes beyond the level of everyday life. What we're really talking about here is a grand cosmic theme, archetypal theme. So it's an archetypal theme which describes what life is all about. It doesn't describe it in a concrete or literal way. It's not that type of description, but it gives us a kind of a mythical approach to it, or a motif that gives us something of the flavour. And so what I just said is that there is this principle of deceptiveness, and we have two ways of being. We can either be vigilant and not stupid, or we can be gullible and fall for everything hook, line and sinker, which is the normal mode. So this is actually, we can actually look at this mythologically and say, well, this is a well-known mythological scenario, or perhaps more to the point, theologically, it's a well-known theological scenario. Theology being a type of mythology, even though no theologists would admit that. So, from a theological point of view, we all know the story. We know it so well, we're totally blind to it, and we don't believe it. We don't take any heed of it because it's kind of corny in a way. It's just like we'd roll our eyes to the heaven if anyone came out with it, because it's kind of just sounds so old. It's old hat, really. But that's because we don't see the metaphorical element of it or aspect of it. We've been beaten over the head, individually probably, and culturally definitely, with the concrete or literal understanding of this principle, which is an utter nonsense. And we've come to realize, for the most part, that it is a nonsense, and we're thoroughly fed up of it. So what I'm talking about is the motif of God and the devil. So according to this motif, we're born, we come into the world, and like it's a thing. It's kind of a thing. Do we do what the devil does, or do we do what God wants us to do? That's the crude way of looking at it. Do we obey God, or do we listen to the devil instead, who tells us to disobey? Now, as I've said, that's the crude way of looking at it. The subtle way of looking at it is to say that they are these two principles: the principles of truth and the principle of deception. These are eternal principles. They've always been there, and this contest is always going on between truth and deception. So God stands for the principle of truth, Satan for the principle of deception. And we can see this because in Islam, Satan is sometimes referred to as the whisperer, because he whispers stuff in our ear, like Facebook or Instagram or any social media thing, to lead us astray. And in Christianity, Satan is the tempter. He dangles little temptations in front of us, which are deceptions, because we're tempted because we think something great is going to happen, and it isn't. That's a lie. All temptations are lies. And the devil is often called the father of lies, the author of all falsehoods. And we can trace this back to thousands of years back to Zoroastrianism, where it is clearly stated that these two principles are the principle of light and truth and the principle of darkness and deception. So Ahura Mazda is the principle of light, and Ahriman is the principle of deception. So here we have these two dudes. This is one of the very earliest dualist religions. It preempts Christianity, it preempts Islam. So that when we're born into this world, there is a contest. And the contest is, do you manage to stay not gullible and see the truth in every situation? Or do you fall at the first fence and become suckered? Do we get suckered by Ahriman? So you could imagine that it's kind of like a little contest, big contest between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. Every single soul that comes into this world. And in this, the principle of darkness, the father of lies, is the more active principle. He will intervene. He will be more evident. Whereas the principle of truth is there, but the voice of truth, like the voice of our conscience, is quiet, as is said in Christianity. It's easily overlooked by all the noise that comes from Ahriman, the bellowing, the roaring, the cajoling, the bluffing, the blustering, the bullshitting. Lots and lots of noise, lots and lots of violence. But the principle of truth isn't violent. It doesn't try and impose itself on us, in contrary to what we tend to think. God doesn't insist that we're free. He doesn't insist that we see the truth. If God insisted that we be free, then we wouldn't be free. The truth doesn't need to insist that we believe it because it's true. Anyway, I don't care if we believe it or not. If I'm peddling lies, then I care very much that you believe them, because I have to have you believe them because they're lies, and that's the only way I can temporarily get them to look like not being lies. That's why all beliefs are lies, because we get touchy about them, because we know they're lies. Only the truth is true, and the truth isn't a belief. So we have this situation where we come into this world and the odds are very much stacked against us, because the principle of deception is active. It has the active mode. And as it says in the Old Testament in a number of places, Satan is the prince of this world, without wishing to get too biblical about it. And this is acknowledged in the Old Testament by Jesus, and in Catharism, which is an esoteric branch of Christianity which was destroyed by Christianity because it got a bit too close to the truth. In fact, it got much closer to the truth in Christianity, which wasn't really at the time, and presently too, is orientated towards belief, not the truth. It's organized on behalf of power structures, belief structures and thought structures. So according to the Cathars, the material world, the tangible world that we can touch and feel and measure, is Satan's world. And it has to be borne in mind that this is a metaphor in the way that I've explained. We don't want to go taking it literally. If we take it literally, that really means that we're super gullible and we've been hoodwinked and we're dummies, and we'll get what's coming to us for being so dumb. The metaphor is then that this is a strong principle in this world, and we see evidence of it everywhere, and we see not so much evidence of the principle of light or truth. Now we could see it if we were subtle enough in our seeing, but we tuned into the material world, or a better way of putting that is to say that we tuned into the thought-created virtual reality. We're tuned into our thoughts and the world that our thoughts show us, which are all material, concrete, measurable. They're like blocks of concrete. There's no subtlety in anything in the thought-created world. So the odds seem to be stacked against us. And they're not just, it doesn't just seem to be stacked against us, it is really. Until we can develop the subtlety to see through the theatre and see what lies beneath it, in which case we realise that the principle of truth is, of course, the stronger principle, because what's true is true, and what's false always will be false. The real never ceases to be true, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita. So there's no real threat to it that way. But even though there's no real threat to the truth, that doesn't mean that we can't come unstuck by believing deception, because then when we believe in deception, it becomes our truth and we don't see anything else, we don't see reality, and so then we suffer from being slaves to the deception, which doesn't do us any good at all, doesn't do us any favours. So this is an archetypal situation. And as such, clearly what we're talking about goes way beyond therapy. There's no myth about CBT, for example. There's no fundamental mythological way of looking at this business of life being alive in terms of CBT. We know that. But there is, in terms of this vigilance that I'm talking about. Vigilance is what it's all about from the beginning to end. It's what it always has been about. Whether we stay vigilant to the tricks that are being played on us, or whether we be gullible instead and fall for them. And this includes all the proponents of mental health that we meet who are part of the cultural society that we're part of. They're part of the trick. And they're inevitably part of the trick in as much as they're coming from thought. They're speaking according to thought. Thought is always deception. Everything you think is true isn't true. All thoughts are deception. Because all thoughts are based on an assumption that we don't examine that isn't actually true. So we really are in a tricky situation. Even the people we trust and believe in and look to for help are part of the deception. And the institutions which we have created are part of the deception. The authorities which we have placed above ourselves are part of the deception. And that's essentially the Gnostic myth, which is as relevant today as it ever was, of course. Okay, thanks for watching.